with Transitions Mental Health Association, and I supervise Helping Hands of Lompoc, which was formerly referred to as the Recovery Learning Community over on G Street, home base on G. So it's a housing apartment complex, and Transitions runs a wellness center Monday through Friday. We have support groups for adults living with mental health issues. We have socialization, we have outings, we have a food bank, we have a computer lab. We'll be starting classes pretty soon there. So a lot of resources, and just trying to get people more involved in the community, kind of away from a clinical setting into community-based, and hopefully, back out into the community as, all of us are. So again, I'm happy to be here. And I teach mental health first aid, which is actually an 8-hour training, and obviously you're not going to be doing an 8-hour training tonight, thank goodness, right? So I'm going to pack a lot of information into a short amount of time. When we do the 8-hour training, we get into psychosis, schizophrenia, addiction. Tonight I'm going to focus mostly on depression, anxiety, and trauma, some of the things that you'll see more commonly in the work that you do. And I just want to thank each one of you for the service that you offer to our community, and I'm happy to be a partner with you all. Any questions so far? I gave you an information sheet, a fact sheet on Helping Hands that we offer. We started a 12-week training academy in October. We're finishing up our last 4 weeks of that. That was developed to provide an opportunity for people who are ready to take that next step in their recovery journey, possibly go back to work, go back to school, improve social skills, and that kind of thing. So that's been exciting. And then I also gave you the brochure for Transitions Mental Health Association and all the programs that are offered. The majority of the programs are in San Luis County. It's kind of where our hub is. And then Transitions has 2 programs in Lompoc, Helping Hands, where I'm at, and then the Lompoc ACT, Assertive Community Treatment Program over on Cypress. And then in Santa Maria, Transitions has 2 programs as well. They have an RLC, which is like our program, and then they have supported services also. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and jump into a little bit of mental health first aid for you guys. So first thing we're going to talk about is what is a mental disorder or a mental illness. It's actually a diagnosable illness that affects a person's, bless you, thinking, emotional state, and behavior. It disrupts the person's ability to work, to carry out daily activities, and to engage in things that they once enjoyed, satisfying relationships, recreation, affects, pretty much all areas of their lives. So before I get to that one, hopefully some of you probably know, so try to hold back and let some of the others. What do you think the most common mental health issue is in the United States amongst adults? Anybody? Most common mental health issue amongst adults in the U.S.
Depression.
Depression. Anybody have another idea?
Anxiety.
Anxiety. Okay, let's take a look. Anxiety. So anxiety comes in first with almost 20%, 1 in 5 adults dealing with an anxiety disorder. And then the next 2 would be major depressive disorder and substance use disorder. I don't know why they have the numbers out of order, but they do. Bipolar disorder, which is a combination of highs and lows, 2.8% of adults. Eating disorders, 5 to 10%. And then schizophrenia is actually a very low prevalence rate, 0.3 to 0.7% of adults are living with with schizophrenia or a psychotic disorder. And yet that's the one that we hear, being called out whenever we have a mass shooting or something horrible happens. They call in to state their mental health and their mental wellness. And actually, it's more common for people living with schizophrenia and psychotic disorders to be victimized than it is for them to actually perpetrate violence. And when they do act out, it's usually against loved ones because they perceive a threat. They're living in a delusional world, where things aren't the reality that we share, and that's usually the reason that they do. But it's not very common. And then if you were to add up that column, 18.1, all the way down to the schizophrenia, it would actually add up to more than 18.5% adults living with any mental disorder. Why do you think it is that if we added those numbers up, it would actually be more than 18.5%?
A lot of people are not diagnosed with it, or?
That's very true. Very true. Also, you guys know about co-occurring disorders, dual diagnosis, people being diagnosed with two or more disorders. It's in fact, about 50% of people who live with one mental health disorder have another, whether it's addiction, anxiety and depression, trauma. And then I'm sorry, your name, sir?
Mike.
As Mike said, I can't remember, that's my husband's name, so. As Mike said, at the very bottom there, if you'll see, only 41% of people with a mental illness actually use mental health services in any given year. So a lot of people are going untreated. Why do you think that is, that people are going untreated? There's a lot of reasons.
Some, if you're in the military, it can be career ending, or if you have a security clearance, or
sure.
Some of it is family or peer pressure. They, you're not in that job, you're not, or right. It's the man up or woman up,
sure,
concept
sure.
of be tougher, instead of
asking for help, reaching out,
or recognizing somebody has help,
Right, right. What are some other reasons you think people go untreated or don't seek out services?
Insurance.
Yes, insurance, lack of resources. Stigma, which I think is what Mike was attesting to, whether it be military, first responders, or just anybody who wants to be labeled crazy, right? So a lot of people will not go get services because they don't want to be that crazy person.
I think it's changed a lot, but still.
Yes.
It's still there, though.
It's still there,
We've made strides. And I'm a person living with a mental health disorder. That's how I actually got into the field. And it's my passion. I've been living with major depression since high school. I didn't know it was that until college. And now I'm able to share my story to hopefully inspire other people. You can get off disability and you can reach your hopes and dreams. And there's a huge peer movement now, or a consumer movement, where people that actually live with mental health issues are working in the field. And I think it's the same with, like veterans and law enforcement. People want to hear from people who've been there. And same with AANA, you want to talk to somebody who understands. So that's huge. All right. So depression, we all get sad. We all experience the blues. It's part of the human experience, but most of us can, cope and get by without treatment. Major depressive disorder actually lasts for at least 2 weeks, and it affects a person's emotions, thinking, behavior, and physical well-being. Pretty much affects all areas of their life. It also affects their ability to work and have satisfying relationships, and their ability to carry out usual daily activities. It's difficult to get up, get dressed, take a shower, brush your teeth. Some of the signs and symptoms of depression, the physical signs and symptoms: fatigue, lack of energy, sleeping too much or too little, overeating or loss of appetite, constipation, weight loss or gain, headaches, irregular menstrual cycles, loss of sexual desires, unexplained aches and pains, and that's just the physical. Then we move on to behavioral signs and symptoms: crying spells, withdrawal from others, neglect of responsibilities, loss of interest in personal appearance, a loss of motivation, slow movement, uptake or use of drugs and alcohol. And again, that's just physical and behavioral. Then we move on, and there's psychological signs and symptoms such as sadness, anxiety, guilt, anger, mood swings, a lack of emotional responsiveness, feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, just what's the point, irritability, frequent self-criticism, self-blame, pessimism, impaired memory and concentration, indecisiveness, confusion, tendency to believe others see one in a negative light, thoughts of death and suicide. So as you can see, there's a lot that goes into, being labeled with a major depressive disorder. So any questions about depression before we move into anxiety? No? All right. So again, we all experience anxiety. We all have that flight or fight mechanism built into us, which comes in handy and we need it. But an anxiety disorder differs from the normal stress and anxiety that, we feel on a day-to-day basis. The symptoms of an anxiety disorder are more severe and can cause impairment in daily life, work, relationships. When looking at the different types of anxiety disorders, we said that the most common is specific phobia. Anybody have a specific phobia? Like me, it's spiders. So things like heights, closed spaces. And usually people with specific phobias can avoid those situations, like highways or bridges, they can usually avoid and cope. Social anxiety disorder, 6.8% of adults live with social anxiety disorder, so fear of being in big crowds or eating in public or speaking in public. And we have post-traumatic stress disorder, 3.5% of adults. Generalized anxiety disorder, just being anxious about a lot of different areas, finances and family and relationships, 3.1% of adults. Panic disorder, where people have recurrent panic attacks, is 2.7%. OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder, where people have to perform ritualistic behaviors to prevent from having a panic attack.
Is that part of anxiety?
That is an anxiety disorder.
Oh, okay. I did not know that.
Yes, it is. It is.
Oh.
Where people, if they don't perform these ritualistic behaviors, like washing their hands, 10 times a minute, then they might have a panic attack. So they do these counting behaviors or checking the locks on the door, 50 times to prevent from having a panic attack. And then agoraphobia, or the fear of leaving a space. It could be your house. For some people, it can be as restrictive as a room. Without panic is less common at 0.9%. And again, if you were to add up the column, it would be more than the 18.1% with any anxiety disorder because of
Overlapping
dual diagnosis, co-occurring comorbidity, all those names. So some of the risk factors for depression, anxiety are similar, so we talk about them together. Distressing, uncontrollable events, stressful and traumatic events, having a difficult childhood or a history of childhood anxiety, ongoing stress and anxiety that just doesn't seem to go away. Someone with another mental illness has a higher risk factor of developing depression or anxiety, so if they have a substance use disorder. Previous episode of depression or anxiety is a risk factor, as well as family history and just having a more sensitive emotional nature. Also, illnesses that are life-threatening, chronic, or associated with pain, another risk factor. Certain medical conditions. Side effects from medications can be a risk factor, as well as recent childbirth, postpartum depression we hear about. There's also prepartum depression or depression during childbearing. Premenstrual changes in hormone levels, lack of exposure to bright light in winter, known as SAD or seasonal affective disorder. Chemical neurotransmitter imbalance, and substance misuse, intoxication, or withdrawal from substances, all risk factors for depression and anxiety. So when we do mental